Okay, and hello and welcome to our exaflicks watch party. We've been watching Ring of Spies. Well, some of us have, because it's just been on TV. Now, if you've just watched it, you're probably going to be thinking, why has Alan chosen this film? It's a bit of a strange film, and I think I need to justify the choice of film, and then we'll discuss the film. So I would say I'm confident that the film's got strong themes of intelligence, information security, and to a bit of an extent, encryption as well. And it's based on historical facts. So, for example, the lead characters in the film, well, they depict actual real people who were involved in the Portland spy ring, which was kind of uncovered at the end of the 50s and the beginning of the 60s. Now, earlier this year, in 2020, the Science Museum in London hosted an exhibition called Top Secret, and it was partly sponsored and in partnership with GCHQ. And the exhibition tells 100 years of the history of GCHQ. Now, while the exhibition closed in February, and it was scheduled to close then, there's plans for it to visit Manchester. So there's a Science Museum in Manchester. Originally, they were hoping for it to be open in October. Because of COVID and everything, I've been told it will still happen. They just haven't announced yet when that particular exhibition will open. And then after it's had a few months at Manchester, it's going to travel to Bradford, to the Science Museum there. And I don't know what will happen after that. But those people who've been to see it, and some people have joined me there, we've all said it's really, really useful, especially from the perspective if you're a teacher of computing, that there are lots of strong themes. And without naming names, I know that some children I've taught in the past have told me that's the kind of route or role that they want to go into in life. And who knows, they may be working for GCHQ now or not. Now, within this exhibition, there's many stories from history, which includes the Portland spy ring, which is the subject of the film. And if you can get to see the exhibition when it's open, I'd recommend that you try to go. I took lots of photographs when I was there and some video, and I've done a lot of research on it myself. So if you'd like to visit there virtually, so if you want one morning, evening, afternoon, you'd like to do one with your family and friends, colleagues, or you'd like to do one for your school, then just have a conversation with me and I'll suggest how we could facilitate that. So now, going back to the film, due to the highly classified nature of things like military intelligence, information security, we don't actually have that many stories that we can tell about things that are going on nowadays, and that's probably fairly obvious. But with the Portland spy ring, a lot of these, the documents that are pertaining to it, the investigation, the surveillance operation, all of that was going on, there's records of these in the National Archives, and you can actually go right now to the National Archives website, but I'd rather you didn't do it right now this minute, but you can actually go and access them and obtain those. And I've downloaded some of them, and some of it is still redacted, but there's a lot of information in there that you can glean from them. And I'd say many of the techniques, I mean, it should be obvious that from watching the film that a lot of those things that are used are quite dated now, but some of us might feel that the principles are still the same, being able to obtain things, find ways to, use people as agents to get them and then transmit them. Now, this is a panel discussion. It's not come along and listen to Alan talk. So I'm going to ask, please, our invited panel guests, if you could introduce yourselves. I'm going to suggest an order. So I'm going to suggest Damian, Hannah, Ilia, Peter, and Lisa, in that sort of order. And then when you're introducing yourself, you could just tell us your name, a little bit about your role. But if you could also highlight a scene in the film that made you laugh, that you enjoyed, or one that had you going, no, like this. Okay, so Damian, are you ready to start?
Yeah, I'm ready to start. That's fine. My name is Damian Sinnott. I'm the head of computer science at Trinity High School in Manchester. I enjoyed the film, but there were quite a few cringe-worthy moments in it, I've got to say. But the one scene that I really did like was when they were using the Krogers were using a sort of typewriter to punch holes in a piece of tape that they then fed into the transmission equipment, and it sent the signal in a burst. Didn't exactly understand how that worked, but it seemed like they were using some sort of compression to get the radio signal into a very short block so that it could be sent all at once. I found that bit quite fascinating. So,
thank you, Damian. And we might expand on that a little bit in a little while, because that was fairly factual, I would like to say. Hannah next.
Hi, I'm Hannah. I'm subject leader for computing at a school in Essex. I've sort of been participating in a lot of Alan's sort of secret history tours during lockdown, and this one sort of piqued my interest a bit. I just found elements quite cringeworthy, as you said before, in terms of it is very much of its time, the film. It would be interesting now that things have been released to the National Archives of perhaps a modern remake of it. Apologies if you don't hear much of this. My connection is a bit unsteady tonight.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. And I think we're going to go to Ilia next.
Hi there. My name is Ilia Avroutine. I'm a head of computer science at Weatherby, down near Baker Street, in fact. And I'm a Russian Canadian, so I think that's why I'm on this panel, represent the Canadians. And I just want to mention that, growing up in USSR, with plenty of 50s and 60s movies about exactly the same thing, but told from a Russian perspective, where the Russians were the heroes and so on. I must say there's one big difference. In that movie, not a single person died. I've never heard of a spy movie where nobody dies. That's absolutely shocking. Talking about scenes, the worst scene for me was the show that those guys went to see, as to where they had some strange man falling on each other, dressed in what I assume was ladies' dresses. I think that just shocked me. That was the quality of entertainment in Britain at that time. I can see why rock and roll made a bit of a difference. And the second cringy moment, if I could say, was when the truck was following their Ford Zodiac, and the guy at the back of a truck speaking into a tiny microphone without any background noise whatsoever. That's amazing technology. If that's still classified, I think it shouldn't be.
Thank you, Ilia. You got quite a few laughs from me then, and the rest of us. Peter, let's hear who you are.
Yeah, my name's Peter, and I'm an ex-communication security person. I now work on the site of the Government Code and Cipher School during wartime. That's Bletchley Park, as a guide and educator at the National Museum of Computing there, where one of my favourite subjects is the cipher attachments that were used by the Germans during the Second World War, principally the Enigma and the Lorentz cipher machine. So that's where my interest lie. My favourite part was the cricket scene, where one MI5 agent says to the other, "Should we leave now?" The other says, "In the middle of an over." So that really, that was quite protocol correct, I thought. I also like the micro dots. That was factual, nicely done. The burst mode transmission as well. I thought the bugs were a bit pushing it for the technology of the day, actually, to make them that small and to make them effective. Although you had to be really close. In fact, actually, when they were looking at the Krogers, they were very close. I've got a very tenuous connection through the museum with the whole story, but I won't expose that right now. We'll come to that later, maybe.
Ooh, going to reveal some secrets.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. And Lisa, thank you for joining us as well, our fifth panelist.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa. I used to be head of computer science at a secondary school, and I work for NCC Group, who are global cybersecurity and risk mitigation consultants. Our headquarters are in Manchester, although my headquarters is in my son's room at the moment. So I was a technical account manager for them mainly around vulnerability scanning, but I run a team of 16 people running vulnerability scanning, DDoS testing, code reviews and that sort of thing. So quite interesting. And yeah, so I've left teaching behind, unfortunately. But there's a few things really I would say. The female role model, the way that they speak, I was so cringy. I don't think of myself as, I've always worked in IT industries and obviously now in cyber and work predominantly with males, and so I've never really I live in a house of men as well. I've got 3 sons, so I never think of it as being anything sort of but respectful. And then when I watch the way they speak to the women, and they're all secretaries obviously, so that was a bit cringy. Same as Peter, the bugging thing made me laugh. The quality of that audio, God, I can't even get Microsoft Teams that good. So I'm really impressed by the quality of the audio. And the other thing that made me laugh a bit was the driving along in the car, and it's obviously a clear sort of green screen. And God, now if you think of the technology we've got to create some amazing films, how films have moved on. So yeah, that was it really.
Wasn't even green screen then, Lisa. That would have been back projection.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There you go. So it's quite good, really, then.
So, did anybody, when we were talking about the chase scenes as well, there was something I'd heard today I'd not spotted the last time. There's 2 agents dressed as nuns, and they're in pursuit. Yeah. And one nun says to the other, and I'm not going to say all of the words, but just, "Don't let the bees get away." And I thought,
I had to do a double take on that.
Yeah, might have blown her cover if other people were listening. Right, here's a challenging question. What do you think the film serves any purpose? What do you think the original purpose of the film may have been, and how successful may have been in terms of achieving that?
I think the style at the beginning was a bit more like a public information film, and at the end saying, "Be careful, you never know who might be involved in this."
Exactly.
Sort of watch your neighbour, watch the people you work with.
Yeah, well, nobody has said this up to this point, but I know when I've read some of the reviews, the critics have said they felt it was a bit too heavy on the documentary, and they got some good actors in, but those actors at the time didn't really show off their best talents. And a thought entered my head, which is, I wonder were the intelligence services behind the production or the commissioning of this film in some way as a kind of, look, there's this threat out there, if we can make people aware of it, but who knows? Any perspective on that?
Well, I think that final statement that was very public information, wasn't it? It was. If it had been done in Patrick, what's his name's voice, it would have been even better. I can't remember the guy's name.
Patrick Stewart.
Patrick
McNee.
Protect and Survive, that chap.
Ah, okay.
Patrick Allen. But that really put the cap on it for me. That last little bit, because it was all very rushed, wasn't it? Towards the end as well. Suddenly they were in court and being pronounced, going to prison. And there's an interesting follow-up story with the prisoner exchanges that went on for Lonsdale and the Krogers as well. So, or the Cohens, it's called.
In preparation for this, I've compiled a load of information. It was on the Eventbrite. I've put it elsewhere, and I've put together a YouTube playlist. And in there, you can find this is some like British Pathé News, where you can see the spy exchange happening. And they were the Cohens. When they returned back to Russia, they were welcomed as state heroes, and they were given awards. And they've got these huge big memorial stones on their graves. Don't know what happened to Lonsdale. Do you think that
he had a stamp? His face was on a stamp.
Ah, okay.
I don't know if the others were, but Lonsdale certainly was. Or Melody, his real name was, wasn't it?
So if we explore the characters in the film just a little bit. So what I think is unusual again about this film is all the lead characters were actually based on real people. And I'm wondering, if relatives were watching this film nowadays and that was their granddad or grandma or something like that, Anybody want to chip in? Like, how do you think relatives might feel watching their relatives being portrayed in this way?
There is there was a bit in the film where the detectives were meant to be they were in a hotel, but someone reported a journalist now. She actually lived opposite the Krogers in the street, and she's wrote an article about what it was like from the family's perspective, because Mrs. Kroger obviously befriended them with the intention of trying to protect themselves, because that was the only house that overlooked the Kroger's bungalow. So, and she's wrote it from a perspective of there were two teenagers in the house, and they were able to keep it secret, even though they had MI5 officers in their house at the time. So,
gay search.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and you can probably imagine if some people of a certain age were listening or watching this right now, those two words might conjure up other kind of associations. So, just a word to the wise, if you are using this with classes, it might be, forewarned is forearmed. So Gay Search used to be a presenter on Gardener's World, and there is another film, a colour film, that was made around the same time, where they just show this surveillance operation on the Kroger's bungalow, and that you can actually find the entirety of that film on YouTube if you have a search for it. Okay. What about Harry Houghton? Did anybody like him in any way? Did anybody find anything to like?
I thought Bernard Lee's acting was appalling.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Yeah, but he was portrayed as a drunk. Certainly not very good with the drink. But
would you say a womanizer?
Well, he tried to be, but he wasn't exactly a catch, was he? Not that I'm inclined that way, but my goodness me, Margaret Tyzack, by contrast, though, I thought her acting was very good. She was, although her change from skepticism to yes, give me the money was all a bit sudden, and I'm sure it didn't happen just like that.
I thought that was an interesting part of the film, how her acceptance changed. Like at the beginning, he was having to use lots of different powers of coercion to get her around to this, and then later on she's saying, how can we get more money? She liked the taste of the riches after a bit.
And for what? To buy shares? I mean, that's the most weird thing. I mean, the boat eventually, she was thinking, but shares.
Yeah. And there is as well, in the YouTube list that I've shared, there's an interview with them later in life when they're both released from prison, and they did, as far as it's clear at the time, they did go back to being a couple, and the romance was still strong after all of that. But just going back to the question, just so I know, did anybody find anything likable about Harry Houghton's character at all?
Not especially.
No.
No.
He didn't really help himself, did he, in terms of
I kind of like the
way
fact
he
that after the first
conducted himself and everything like that.
After the first information dropped, it was the movie, he wasn't really insisting on selling anymore. It looked like he's kind of thought, no, that's enough, I don't like it. I mean, did they do it so they could show that she was trying to push things out? I don't know, but it's almost like he did it very reluctantly and was surprised by what she wanted to do. I don't know. Maybe it was just the arc, the plot arc.
I think if you're going to use this as well in sort of a classroom environment, there's so many things you could discuss around real life scenarios. And his character, you always think of sort of hacking as being something that you have to have a sort of element of intelligence. And he really didn't seem to have anything. I mean, he was even driving around in a massive, ludicrous car to say, just to stand out even more than he did anyway. And there was no intelligence in what he was doing other than telling somebody else to open a filing cabinet, really.
That's right. When I mentioned the documents of the National Archive, some of these are interviews with his neighbours, and people were saying, how can somebody who's on like a clerk's salary buy such a huge, big, flash yellow convertible, and and he was always buying drinks for everybody. And it's like, well, where is the money coming from?
Yeah, for goodness' sake, one week he spent £10.14 and sixpence on drink.
Yeah,
That was another. What? You can't even. You can't get a single drink. Well, you can, but crazy.
You can't get a double gin and tonic, can you, for that?
No.
London, anyway.
So, were there any characters in the film that had redeeming qualities? That maybe, if I allow you to think about that one, there was a point that Lisa prompted me to consider as well. When we're talking about, to hack, to obtain information from other people, it's not just about having the technique and the technical tools. There was a lot of social engineering evident within the film.
Yeah.
Because they had something on him that they wanted to use, that they tried to use to blackmail him. But you could say, well, what damage would it have done? But then they used money as well as an incentive, and then that then put the pressure on him like a domino onto her, and so on. And Martin in the chat, he's saying that he thinks this might make an interesting point for GCSE computer science. There's sort of the social engineering element. So the question.
You can create some, sorry. If there's weird noises, by the way, it's my dog who's decided to get a load of toys. He's normally going for a walk now, so he's like getting loads of toys randomly and throwing them at me. So you could do like a sort of in sort of business, you sort of play bullshit bingo where you get a grid and you put a load of words in. Obviously, you might have to rephrase that for a setting, but the point would be you could have social engineering, shouldering. I wrote some of these honeypot. What was the other thing? Social engineer, I've said, haven't I?
Passwords. Fingerprinting,
passwords. You could have a load of words in there that they've got to cross-reference to it.
Obfuscation is another one.
Yeah.
Like, for example, and then there's the other one, I forgot what do they call it? When you steganography. Yeah. So the microdots within the book,
well, it's a storage device, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
And then you have modulator, demodulator to produce the burst. Yeah.
We talk about public and private keys if you push it.
Yeah.
So this leads into the question I was going to ask next, which is about what sort of techniques, things did you see then that you think are no longer going to be used nowadays, or some that have developed into other. So, for example, when Gordon Lonsdale was traveling out to Ruislip, and he went to one station, then to another one, and then he got onto a train, and then off the train, back on the train, do you think any of those strategies are actually being used? For playing a game of bingo, the meet up with the spy. Oh, excuse me, sir, does the 322 do a bingo this way?
Is that routing?
Yeah, that's a good one.
I don't think there's any reason to assume that doesn't go on. That sort of, if you're, that's got a tradecraft is still taught the ability to evade a tail, or to observe a tail and to actually maybe engage the tail, but on your terms. That almost certainly still goes on. Whether they use corny code phrases like "does a 406 go past the so and so and so?" It's a code word is a code word. It could be anything.
It's just a key, though, isn't it? That's just
the
analogy of a key.
Yeah, dead drops are still used, and you didn't see that actually happen in the movie, but that's how the rendezvous would have been arranged.
But I would argue that CCTV cameras outside of everywhere might make it less effective, switching trains.
True.
So I was going to ask if the film raised any questions, and there was a point that Damian mentioned earlier on where he said there was a point where they used an encoding device that looked like a typewriter, and Helen Kroger, Gordon's reading things out to her that sounded like ballistics information, like, oh yeah, we can detect missiles at 200 meters. So she's typing all of this in, and then there's this punch bit of paper, and then he burns the paper, and they take the device. So if you visit the exhibition, you can actually see either the same artifacts or artifacts similar to them that were retrieved when they raided the bungalow, or that were found in other things like this have been found in other places since. Peter, I wonder if you'd be able to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, burst mode is still being used nowadays for a number of scenarios. One of which is a bugging situation where you maybe don't want to be on real time monitoring, but you want to record a conversation and read and transmit it later. So that's and obviously burst mode is to avoid radio direction finding. That's its principle. It's not an encryption technique per se. So it means you're on air for as short a time as possible. The radio sets, for example, will be designed specifically for that. So there would have been valve sets at the time to get the power. So there would have been 15 minutes or so warm-up time during which they would not radiate. You only radiate, you switch the radiation on for a very brief period of time when you're reading the pre-prepared burst tape. The Russians used dozens of different variants of those. They're all quite small, and at the Science Museum exhibition, you can see a real device, and it is pretty darn small. She was using a stenography type attachment, and so she was transcribing words to code, probably something mundane as Morse code, just using the hand encoder. And the Morse code would then have been encoded onto mag tape, probably a 1/2-inch mag tape, from the looks of the cassette they were using, and that spun through the reader quite a great rate, and that was realistic. The speed with which that tape flew through the reader was quite realistic. The throughput of that is between 250 and 500 words per minute. A word being 5 characters on average. So that's pretty darn fast. So what he transcribed, what he dictated, would have easily been transmitted in maybe two or 3 seconds worth of burst, which wouldn't have given you any time to lock on to the transmission. So I thought that was realistic. The key to that they would have typically in that sort of situation to code it would have been using a one-time pad, and then the page, if you like, of the one-time pad would have been transmitted to them by the numbers stations. And these are just stations that appear out of nowhere on HF radio and just recite numbers. And a certain sequence of numbers at a particular time of day would indicate the section of the one-time pad you were required to use on a particular transmission. So, and of course, one-time pad properly encoded is unbreakable. So it's a waste of time trying to decipher the messages when they're in transit.
I wonder, Peter, would you be able to expand as well? To me, it wasn't really clear why they were using the microdots for. Okay, you could say microdots for diagrams and illustrations.
That was for photographs, illustrations, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And for actually, as I understand it, Lonsdale used that method to send letters home to his missus in Poland. So, almost domestic stuff. But images, which any text-based, you can't. But burst mode is text-based, so that's the dictation side of it. Anything requiring transmission of images would have been reduced to a microdot.
So the burst mode would have been used as probably as preferred because that was the fastest way of getting. If Moscow was the sort of receiving end.
But you couldn't send a diagram that way because it's just too much data in a diagram. Yeah. Even if you were able to encode it facsimile style, because fax transmission's been around since in its various forms since the 40s, but it's just too data heavy. You would have to be online for too long. So text only on burst mode. And the images would have been reduced to a microdot and would have had to been sent out in the antiquarian books that Kroger was sending all over the world, basically. Or actually, they would just take them to the Russian legation and they'd go in a diplomatic bag, probably, more likely.
So there would have been a time delay then with the microdots because physically, like Peter said, he was booked on a flight to Paris and then he'd have to meet somebody, go to the baggage claim, all of this sort of stuff. So that was traveling sort of over surface. Martin's asked a question. He was wondering how the microdot might have been read. Did they just have a powerful magnifying glass at the other end, or?
It's essentially a microscope, probably.
Yeah, I presume.
But it would have been an enlarger of sorts. So
not for spying purposes. but I graduated from University of Toronto, and a part of the library was on microfiche. Am I saying it right? So
Yes.
yeah. So the machine was literally a very powerful magnifying glass and a microscope, and you just get your little, wasn't like a stamp or a tiny little thing, and you would just read it. I suppose it's the same technology, isn't it?
Yeah, same principle.
Okay, so I'm going to ask now some questions here about the kind of suitability in terms of an audience. So the film, it's rated PG, and if you were watching it on the TV, it came up and said, you know, this is rated PG. I wonder if anybody might be tempted to show the film or parts of the film to an audience of 12 to 16-year-olds. Might you prepare them for watching it? If it's too long in its entirety, would you take bits out of it, or would you just rather just take the whole thing and throw it in the bin? Damian, I'm looking at you now.
I think because of the historical context and some of the cringiness, for me, I'd probably use it with my sixth form rather than under 16s.
Yeah.
And would you'd say at the beginning, which is sort of as a disclaimer, by the way, we're going to watch something, and I know you're going to be cringe in the way that women are portrayed in this film. It's blah 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 blah. However, yeah, okay.
I think it could create a lot of debate. You know, my computer science class like to talk about things that aren't just computing, but it does give them a historical insight into what the world was like. You know, not that long ago, really. So yeah, I think it could be valuable.
I wonder as well whether there might be some value in saying to those sixth formers, right, now we've watched the film, so this was made like in the early 60s. If these things are still going on today, and we read accounts of things that are going on in the news, like people being poisoned and this website being hacked and presidential candidates having their emails hacked and all this kind of stuff, what would agents be using today if they're still doing the same kind of activities, you know, but they're not meeting in the street and passing each other shopping baskets?
Well, I think the internet's going to have changed an awful lot, hasn't it? So, but is it easier to intercept things on the internet, or is it possible to do the burst signal on the radio? Is it possible to do that on the internet? The way the internet's set up, everything's split into packets, so that might be quite difficult, mightn't it? But it'll create debate and get the students to think about those things in a very different way. So,
I would say that a lot has changed in terms of who spies are. In the old days, obviously, because of the Iron Curtain, a Russian or Polish couldn't just come over here. While obviously, since the wall came out, you have all sorts of Russians, let's say, just living and having careers. I mean, that's like Google was started by a lad from St. Petersburg. WhatsApp was started by I forget who the guy was. Skype was started by the Russian guy in Estonia. So I don't think they need to have identities like that anymore, because they could be just working whatever they're doing and have information anyway. Because most of them, like myself, for example, are honestly trying to do a good job, and I'm pretty sure that there are some spies. And I'll tell you, there's some weird Russian people in London that I meet sometimes. That you look at them thinking, I'm not sure that you are who you are. Anyway,
I've met a few of those, Ilia, I can tell you.
Yeah.
I spent a few days in Lisbon with one, and I was wondering who was questioning who most of the time. Actually, it was quite a bizarre experience. But there you go. And this guy was a friend, for goodness' sake. So,
yeah.
Awkward, very awkward.
Lisa,
Sorry, Alan. I was just going to say, it's interesting, isn't it, how people trust is, with face-to-face trust and judgment as well. Because obviously, the kids will watch that and go, well, no, you're never going to believe him, are you? He's wearing a strange hat or something. But then they're quite happy to go on the internet and make friends with people they've never seen. They don't even know whether they're the same age group, and that would be quite an interesting conversation, I think.
I think you've made a great point there, and it comes back to social engineering, which is, if you think of Elizabeth G early on, she thinks Harry's like, who is he? He's horrible. He's like chatting up all the pretty girls in the office. And when he asks her, will you do this for me? She's like, no, absolutely. I'm going to leave. But then when he says to her, oh, we're doing this for the Americans and it's our national duty. She's like, oh. And it all changes because he uses the American thing kind of as leverage, doesn't he?
Almost,
yeah.
Certainly justification, yeah.
Giving her life importance.
That's right. There's a scene, isn't there, where she's on the two of them are on the train. They're traveling from Winchester, and she's doing, we're not small people or little people anymore, are we? We're VIPs.
And then she says she wants to move to America and get an American passport.
Citizenship.
Yeah. Interesting.
But she's quite intelligent, isn't she? And sitting behind a desk filing a few things is obviously not stretching her imagination too. I thought the gas man was quite funny, actually, for social engineering. He's just, I'm a gas man, I'm coming to check your meter and just sticking bugs everywhere.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But he gives him the option, doesn't he? He says, listen, it's fine. I don't have to do it. But obviously it's going to cost you more money. And we can't have this. Come on, do it now,
Yeah.
Going back to the American thing, I thought that it was portrayed that was justification for Harry doing what he was doing as well. That gave him a sort of level of not quite innocence. It kind of took the edge off as far as his guilt was concerned, if he had any guilt. Who knows?
There's a point as well after the first exchange. Elizabeth decided, I don't want to do this anymore, and he's saying, but you've met Alex, who's another name for Gordon. You don't want to let him down. And, we had the nice party and he seemed like such a nice guy. But then she said, he could be a Russian agent. And Harry goes, yes, but he didn't sound Russian, did he?
Yeah,
he doesn't have a Russian name. I mean, Alex is not a Russian name. This guy, he's trying to use all these things. Right. If we hadn't chosen this film, if you could have chosen another film that you think would have been a better suit, anybody seen anything, any episodes, any dramas that are on Netflix, Amazon TV? I mean, there's been lots like Spooks and some of these other ones, but no.
I'm really looking forward to the War Games one, Alan, because as a teenage boy, I really loved that film. So
it's interesting when I've mentioned War Games, I hadn't rated it that highly, but lots of people have come back and said, because as well, there's a bigger story isn't there, about the child who can do these things, and so let's talk about that another point. Peter, you had your head in your hands when I mentioned Spooks.
Me? No. Spooks was great series, and the detailing Spooks was amazing, even down to the weighing machine that weighs you when you go in and out of the spy headquarters to make sure you're not nicked anything, so you don't go out heavier than you came in. And that goes on, or rather, it did once upon a time. It probably still does. Can I bring up this thing I mentioned earlier about the connection between our museum and this broader story?
Please,
that was a bit tenuous. I just don't want to forget it. You may know of Peter Wright. He wrote a book called Spycatcher, which was banned for publication in the UK. I had to get my copy from Eason's bookshop in Dublin by post, donkeys ages ago now. Now, Mr. Wright was an MI5 agent of sorts. Basically, he was a dumping ground for anything technical that needed to be done. But he himself wasn't particularly technical. But he had a person, an ex-RAF chap working for him, whose name was Tony Sale. Now, you might recognise that. Tony Sale was responsible in the late 80s, early 90s for the rebuild of Colossus. He was the driving force. Actually, he and his wife, Margaret, were central to the preservation of Bletchley Park in its entirety. So it was the drive of those two that was hooked into by numerous other people who became rather more voluble about their contributions to it, shall I say? But it was basically Tony and Margaret that were central to the preservation of the park and the creativity of the Milton Keynes Development Council. Let's give them credit. It's rare that anybody gives a local council credit, but MKDC definitely deserves it. So Tony was Peter Wright's technical man. Now, what's Peter Wright got to do with it? Well, he was involved in the clear up of the Kroger's residence, where I think they found, once they'd done a few sweeps through the place and seized all the kit they thought was there, they found another 5 radio sets. So it was about that time that Peter Wright would have been involved, trying to I mean, how do you hide 5 radio sets in a 2-bedroom bungalow, for goodness sake? So there's the tenuous connection between the museum and this overall story. It's a little bit loose, I know, but there you go.
I'd just like to read out some of the comments. Thank you, Peter, from that are going on the chat. So Jerry mentioned a point earlier, was saying that some of the cringe-worthy parts, I think it's largely the first part of the film. He thinks that they may actually have some educational value to kind of say, look at this. This is, this film was made in the 60s and this is how people were portrayed. How should it be different? So that Dorian has recommended The Americans. I've heard somebody else recommend that as well, but it's not one I'm familiar with. Martin says he's looking forward to seeing The Social Dilemma on Netflix. And Jerry, another vote for War Games, he's saying it's not the highest quality movie, but he feels it does introduce some computing principles to people who may not see themselves as being interested in computing, and it resonates to nuclear fears at the time, and also there's the nostalgia that it induces. So that's our choice on the 21st of October, which is the 3rd Wednesday of October. Right. Any final comments anybody wants to make before we start the rest of our Friday evenings? Anything that you wished you'd said before now and you hadn't?
I think I'm good.
Right, then we'll say that's a wrap. So thank you very much, all of our panelists. I'm giving a round of applause here for all of you. Thank you for giving up your time, and apologies if the film didn't quite meet your expectations, but we're on a journey here. So thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to end the recording, and then I'll hang around for a few minutes in case anybody else